Welcome Wargamers, my name is Doug with 2+Tough, and this whole week we're talking a lot about Legacy of Atmos, a awesome game that is now up for Kickstarter. I've had the great joy and pleasure of doing some playtesting, and I'm actually involved in a playtesters tournament right now as the time of recording, and I've been having an absolute blast with it. So if you are someone who's curious about the nature of the kinds of units in this game, or how to get the most out of them, if you've already backed the Kickstarter, this video we're going to be going unit by unit and looking at the various models that come in the Tellus Commune faction, which is sort of like the nature and forest focused side of the core set. I'll list out every single unit that you get in the box, and then we'll go through like unit by unit and talk about what their strengths and weaknesses are and kind of break down the information on their warrior card, or their fighter card, whatever we want to call it, and get you a sense of what this unit is really meant to do within the game. Now, if you have not yet backed their Kickstarter, I really hope that you would just watch this, give it a chance, see their design ideas and what really they brought to the table in terms of a unique and fun miniatures game that is really designed for competitive play, but also is great for casual fun. So without further ado, let's dig in. In the main core set for Legacy of Atmos, the Tellus Commune models come with Ashala, 7th daughter of Athel, Olfan Blood Creek, 2 Athel Guardians, 2 Aldasa, several Saplings, some Carath Warriors, Carath Soothsayers, and Crealis Wolves. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, from like a high bird's eye view, I have to be honest, these are some of my favorite models. I love the Saplings, I love the wolf with the gems on its back, the Crealis Wolf, and I've had great effect when I've actually been playtesting the game. This is the faction that I have really focused on. I didn't want to play both of them because I didn't want to get like rules bleed from one to the other. It's like, no, I'm going to play this game, pick a faction, and really learn and understand it. When it comes to the Tellus Commune, there are a lot of different ways to achieve victory, and they are extremely different from one another. What I would say is, for this faction, going into it with a game plan is absolutely critical. But if you do, you will find that you will rank high on the scoreboard every single time. Now, funny enough, when I do these kinds of bird's eye view, takes on a faction, typically I kind of review the pros and cons of it, and funny enough, the good folks over at Legacy of Atmos have already done that for us. Because here we have a list of pros and cons. This comes straight out of the core book, and it's just really to illustrate what this faction is, the Tellus Commune. So, as far as pros go for their playing, they generally are faster than the other faction. They have many defensive and debuff-based magics, which is absolutely true. I use those to great effect. They have strong melee combatant options. Specifically, Olfan Blood Creek is a absolute beast if you let him get in there. Then they also have a wide variety of playstyles, depending on army composition. I kind of touched on that, and we will review some of those towards the end once we have the context of how these units work. Gaia powers, which we'll get into in just a moment, but let's talk about the cons, okay? They have limited range, there's not a lot of guns, and the guns that you have are pretty short range, usually max out around 6 or 8 inches. They have very limited armor. These are glass cannons for the most part. There are some units, of course, that can take a punch, but really you want to be the one going in there and delivering the decisive blow first. Limited offensive spell options, and while that's true, I would just kind of add as an asterisk after that thing, like, that is a perfectly true con. However, they do have a lot of ways to do multiple types of damage at range. So, like, even though they have short range, there's ways of delivering poison tokens to your opponent, which ultimately will hurt them in the long run. And lastly, it says harder to play due to needing to manage Gaia powers with mana and spell. So let's talk about Gaia, because they brought it up at the end of both the pro and the con. This is really designed to be a finesse army. And so in addition to the mana that you use to cast spells and any kind of movement abilities, that kind of stuff, cards, you also have this thing called Gaia, which is just, you keep track of it. I use a D20 to keep track of mine. And I'm just going to read this bit here for you because they explain it really well. The Tellus Commune are the favored creations of the soul star god Athel. As such, he grants them some of his mighty power to help them in times of war and crisis. In-game, this translates to the Tellus having a separate resource called Gaia. Tellus gain +2 Gaia during the start of every round, so that's consistent. They also gain an additional one for the first time they kill a unit or the first time they successfully pass a divine save during each round. For those of you who play any Games Workshop games, so like Age of Sigmar 40k, a divine save is functionally like a mortal wound, if you will. It bypasses armor, but there are special effects in the game that allow you to take a save against it. And if we look down below here, you will see 6 abilities, each with a number next to it. That is its cost. And so you can spend, for example, 1 of your Gaia points for a rule called Slice of Divinity. When an allied model is attacked, give the targeted model a 5-up divine save for the rest of the round. So in this way, you can spend 1 point of Gaia, give someone a save against, super wounds, mortal wounds, that kind of thing. And if they save it, well, then you've met the qualifications for getting 1 Gaia by the rules of it. So there's always this chance that you can be recuperating what you're spending. Beyond that, there is the Aldasa and Soothsayers receive +2 to their overcast rolls. Many spells in the game you can either just plain activate it and get their basic effect, or you can roll 2d6 trying to hit a target number, and then it'll have some grander effect, an overcast. And so this would help them kind of supercharge the spell casting. Then there is Earth Father's Gaze, which costs 2 Gaia, increase 1 allied model's movement, range skill, or melee skill by +1 until the end of the round. Now, this one actually helped me immensely when it came to some of the gambits, the win conditions that I had, because in my first video I mentioned that Legacy of Atmos has asymmetrical win conditions. It's kind of like Warhammer Underworlds, you choose your objectives. Well, one of my objectives that I had was every time a sapling made a charge. So all of a sudden, if I can buff their speed, I can start hurling saplings in from a farther distance. So that's kind of the idea here. Next is Tears of the Earth Father. You can only use this ability at the end of a battle round, heal up to 2 allied models, D3 points, which is super useful. Then there is Sustenance of Athel. Draw 1 card and gain D3 mana. That is fantastic because one of the problems that I ran into with this faction is that I wanted to use all of their abilities very, very quickly, and I all of a sudden had no cards in my hand. So that could be exceptionally powerful. And the last one here is Wisdom of a God. Search your deck for a card that costs 3 or less and add it to your hand. And just a small note on that, it's talking about spell cards and that kind of thing. So you're basically toiling through your entire deck to find a spell card that works for you. And so those are the Gaia powers. Think of this as like a allegiance ability, a faction ability that is specific to the Tellus Commune. And it's important to remember these things because as we look at the individual units, you have to remember that almost every unit can be affected by almost every Gaia power. The real standout here is that the Chosen Children, where it's just spellcasters, can increase their overcast ability, but for the most part, all of these things can be affected by anyone. So when you look at an individual unit, think about how these Gaia powers can buff them up. And we're going to kick off our exploration of the named characters by talking about Ashala, the 7th daughter. So let's talk about this. She has a 7-inch move. She has 8 health, which is pretty good. Spirit of 10, which means she's not going to fail what are essentially bravery checks at all, really. She's going to do quite well. She has a ranged attack of a 3-up, so on a 3-up she will do damage. That's kind of all that's telling you. Same thing for melee with a 4-up. And she has this stat called Fortitude 1. Now, we're not going to see a whole lot of this in this faction because they tend to be squishy, but Fortitude essentially reduces the amount of damage per attack that hits you by 1 to a minimum. So, for example, she has a Fortitude of 1. If she were to take a 3 damage attack, she would suffer 2 damage. Now, there's ways to save those other wounds as well, but it will always reduce it by 1. If she had Fortitude 2, it would reduce it by 2 damage to a minimum of 1. You get the idea. Next to that, the AR with a dash is her armor. She doesn't have any because she's a leaf, basically. She costs 27 points and she is limited to 1 per army, which makes sense. She's a character. Now, looking down at her abilities, once per round, you can spend 1 Gaia to summon 1 sapling model within 2 inches of Ashala. This is the Call of Tellus ability, and I love this one because, as I've said before, I like to run summoning spam lists where I'm trying to put as many saplings on the board as possible, and so I get rewarded for using this. The next ability is Mother's Scepter. Ashala has a 5-up divine save, just flat out, period. So between that and the Fortitude 1, she can take some kind of hits, but not a lot. You can target one allied Tellus Commune model within 12 inches of Ashala and roll 4d6. If there's a 4 or a 5 among the rolls, give the model a 5-up divine save. If the model has at least 1 6, also increase your Gaia by 1. That one's a little interesting. I mean, it's just a way to fish for more Gaia points and ways to give out divine saves, but it makes her a great like backline buff piece because 12 inches is pretty big on this board. It's almost a third of the board. So it can kind of like, she can project that forward. And her last ability here is Communion of Tellus, which is an aura effect, constantly in effect around her. All allied feral type models within 12 inches of Ashala do not go feral. That's going to be extremely important because the Tellus Commune has a number of models that have the feral keyword on them. If they are not in range of a hero who can kind of reel them in and tame them, you don't lose control completely, but they will run and charge forward to the nearest model. You have some say on how they get there, kind of, but realistically, you want to be able to control all of your units. Now, as far as attacks go, she only has one. It is the Gaia Beam, and it doesn't cost anything. It's not going to magic attack or anything like that. 12-inch range, only roll 1 attack die, and it does 3 damage. Now, the effects of this attack are interesting. Divine, meaning it's going to do divine damage. It's not going to, it's basically, it's like mortal wounds rather than a normal attack. And the ability Close Ranged, which is that you use the Gaia Beam profile, 12-inch range, 1 attack, 3 damage in melee and at ranged. So if you're in melee, she's going to be using her melee score of a 4-up. At ranged, it's a 3-up. And I love that there's this ability at the bottom. Before rolling for hit rolls, you can subtract 2 Gaia from your pool to increase the damage of this weapon by the amount subtracted. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, if you're going to do that, I highly recommend also just, if you're going to double down and make like a death ray out of that Gaia Beam, double down and do the Gaia power that gives her +1 to her range shots, because holy smokes, like you don't want to miss that. But all in all, she is my favorite of the leaders simply because I like having a backfield commander that very much supports the rest of the army, and by constantly, farting out a whole bunch of saplings and projecting that 5-up divine save forward onto the melee units, I think that she's a slam dunk. Now, to contrast her, the next unit in here is Olfan Bloodcreek. This is sort of your melee beastman type of character that is fighting for the woods. He has a 7-inch move as well, which is awesome. 8 health. He has a spirit of 8 as well, so he's a little bit more afraid of spirit checks and things like that. No ranged weapon or access to one whatsoever, which is totally fine. His melee skill is a mighty 2-up, which is phenomenal. He also has a fortitude of 1, so he's going to reduce damage that comes in at him, but he has an armor of 5-up. So for every wound that comes, you're going to roll a die. Any 5-ups will negate a wound, and then his fortitude will kick in and reduce it by 1 to a minimum of 1 on top of that. Costs 24 points, and of course, because he's a named character, he's limited to 1 per army. Now, as far as his abilities go, Runes of Corruption. Consume 1 Dark Fate to give Olfan's weapon Armor Piercing 3 and Cleave 2 until the end of the round. Using this ability does not take up an action. It specifically says it does not take up an action. This is incredible because if you can get him into combat, you can supercharge his attacks. Now, essentially, Armor Piercing, as you might expect, is going to make your opponent's armor suffer. It's going to reduce their armor in most cases. Armor Piercing 3 is going to cut through them like a warm knife through butter. But you might be asking, well, if that's Armor Piercing, what is Cleave? Cleave is one of the coolest abilities in this entire game, okay? I'm going to read it off to you. If the owner of this weapon deals damage to an enemy model, deal X damage to all enemy models within 2 inches of the damaged model. This effect can only happen once per activation. So essentially, if you get Olfan Bloodcreek into melee, he rushes forward, he hits his target with like the hammer of God because you've buffed it with Dark Fate. Not only does it hurt that model, but because it's Cleave 2, any model that's like within 2 inches of the guy who got initially hit is also taking 2 damage. which is an epic ability. As far as his next one, Eager for Blood, passive ability. When Olfan initiates melee combat, he receives +1 attacks to his Obsidian Great Axe's weapon profile until the end of the round. So he gets a little even better at melee just because he initiated combat. Now I want to just specify something really quick here. Initiating combat is sort of a broad term in this game. So like if he moves into combat with any other model, even if whatever he's, moving to attack is already engaged with one of your guys, it's considered him initiating. It's just during your activation, you move to be within an inch of an enemy model. If he gets charged, he did not initiate combat and therefore would not get that benefit. Next up is Gleeful Killing, which is a passive ability. When Olfan kills an enemy model, add +1 Dark Fate to your Fate pool. Again, he just is having this cycle of giving you dark energy that you can then spend on buffing up his attacks. It is a savage unit. Now his weapon, Obsidian Great Axes, cost is 0. Range is melee, of course. He has to be in melee to use them. 2 attacks, again, 3 if he initiates combat for any way. And as far as damage goes, it is 1 plus D3 normally, and then the effects armor piercing 1 as normal. So like you can buff him up to armor piercing 3, but he will always have some way of mitigating armor. But when he gets that charge, when he lands into combat and you buff him with Runes of Corruption and the way that that cleave works, he can swing way above his weight class. All right, so now we're out of the realm of named characters. We're going to start talking about various units, but we'll start with the big boy, the Athel Guardian. Okay, he has a 6-inch move. He has 10 health, which is wonderful. His spirit is 8. His ranged attack is 4 up. Melee is 3 up. He has a fortitude of 1 because he is a big tanky guy. I know I said that fortitude is mostly something for characters, and it is, but tends to also be on big centerpiece models as well. He has an armor of 5+, a cost of 21 points, and a limit of 2, which is great because you get 2 inside the starter set, so you'll never have to buy more. Now, what's interesting here is I haven't really touched on model types here because it's like keyword stuff, so that kind of matters when it comes to synergies. However, this keyword, Colossal, is interesting because that means he counts as 2 models when you're counting to see how many are claiming objectives. So he's just a bigger footprint, and he's going to count as 2 guys no matter what zone he's in, which is wonderful. His abilities, he has the Soother of Trees aura. Tree folk type models who are within 12 inches of the Athel Guardian do not go feral. Auras do not require line of sight. So as far as tree folk type models who can go feral, he's really talking about saplings. He sort of acts like a totem that they all follow. Now for weapons, you have 2 options. One is free, one costs 5 points. The free one is Bark Mauler. It is a melee weapon with 2 attacks that do 3 plus D3 damage. And if you've been paying attention, that is a brutal attack profile. Lots of damage. However, that would leave him absolutely useless when it came to ranged combat. It is only a melee weapon. The other option down below is the Moonlit Greatsword, which costs 5 points, as I said. It is a melee weapon, and it does have 1 attack, but the damage is 4 plus D3, which is wonderful. Also has armor piercing -3 and cleave 1, meaning he's going to cut through enemy armor like it's paper, and then anyone within 2 inches of the person who got hit is going to take 1 cleave damage. What's cool about this, though, is that this allows him to use this sword at range. He's essentially like channeling moon energy and it's firing out of the blade. While attacking from range, this weapon uses the following weapon profile. So now it's a 12-inch range gun, has 2 attacks, does D3 damage each, and it does Weaken and Lifesteal, which essentially, to put it very simply, Weaken ignores X amount of an enemy's fortitude stat. So that makes it a gun that is fantastic at hero hunting because it's going to ignore all of the fortitude for most units. Usually there's only 1 or 2 fortitude. And as far as lifesteal, whenever this weapon deals damage, the wielder, meaning the Athel Guardian, gains X health. So with this one, he's making, larger, more important targets that have fortitude weaker and also healing himself when he does so. Now there are some optional upgrades here at the bottom. The spell Bark Shield, which costs 3 points, It is an upgrade type, and its ability is increase the wielder of this shield's armor and fortitude by +1. So that would give him a fortitude of 2, armor of 4 up, which I think is phenomenal. There are definitely lists that really just focus on running 2 massive hammers of these guys and then just a bunch of other stuff to capture objectives. These guys bolt in, smash all the enemies, like, doing a lot of target priority, of course. They're not invincible by any stretch, but you can play in a way where you really focus on big, stompy trees that go in and just clean house. And next up is the Aldasa, a wonderful unit that has some great upgrade cards as far as like when you're deck building, special abilities and stuff. 6-inch move, 6 health, 7 spirit, ranged attack on a 3-up, melee on a 4-up, no fortitude, armor of a 6+, so generally speaking, gonna get hurt pretty easy. Only costs 16 points though, and you can have up to 3 in your list. Now, she's equipped with 2 different things. She has a Gaia Sap, which is a ranged attack, and the Vine Whip, which is a melee. But I don't want to skip her ability because it's very useful. All allied feral type models within 12 inches of the Aldasa do not go feral. That's going to become very important the further down this list we go and we start talking about the weaker, more chaff type units. For the ranged weapon, this is going to be hitting on a 3-up. She has Gaia Sap, which is an 8-inch ranged attack. You roll 3 dice for it. It only does 1 damage each, but the effects are, I think, where it's at. The first one is long range. And long range is a universal special rule. This weapon can add 6 inches to its range at the cost of -1 to their ranged skill. So you can make her shoot further, but then she's going to be hitting on a 4-up rather than a 3-up. But what I love is poison. This to me is the keyword that makes the whole world go round. There are gambits in the Tellus Commune that reward you. You get victory points based on how many people you can poison. And so this is a wonderful thing where if the attack lands, it only does 1 damage. But in addition to that, you put a poison token next to the enemy. At the end of the round, all poison tokens are removed and units take the amount of damage with no saves, nothing like that allowed, equal to the number of poison tokens they had. The reason that's important is you can functionally just poison a model to death, even though they don't die on the table. Your opponent knows the clock is ticking with them. And I think that makes an immense amount of fun. Now, her melee attack is the Vine Whip. 2 attacks, it does D3 damage each, which is great. And they do poison, which is good. But honestly, you don't want her in combat. Just a heads up, she's not tanky. Now there is a upgrade for her called Runed Bark, which cost of 3 upgrade card, and this model is equipped with a Runed Bark, receives +1 to their fortitude and armor save. Personally, I mean, unless there's a specific build you're kind of going for, but that's just not a whole lot of bonuses. I mean, the fortitude is fantastic. The armor save, going from a 6-up to a 5-up on something so squishy is not a huge change, but I generally passed on that as an upgrade, but I could see some use for it if you wanted to focus on spellcasting. Next is the Telus Sapling. Little tiny guy, has a 6-inch move, only 3 health, a spirit of 4, which is not good. If he is forced to make any spirit tests, he will be hurt very, very badly. He has no gun whatsoever, no range skill, melee skill of a 5-up, no fortitude, no armor, and you can have up to 5 in your list. You can spawn more throughout the game, but you can only have 5 in your list when you design it. As far as abilities go, he has the Feral word, which we were talking about earlier. This model cannot normally be controlled by a player. Instead, at the beginning of their activation, immediately push forward, which is basically your movement plus D3, to the closest enemy model. You're just always trying to get in combat. However, to complement this model does not count towards your army's total when checking if you have shattered in the spirit phase, meaning there's a point in which you lose so many guys that you have to start taking bravery tests. He does not count against you. So you can flood the board with these and they can die with impunity because you don't care. They're not making you do any kind of tests for it. Now his weapon attack is Poison Swipes, costs nothing. It's a melee attack with 2 attacks, 1 damage each, and poison. Poison's nice. Honestly, don't count on these guys doing a lot. They are here to capture objectives, to block attack and charge lanes, and just kind of act as board control. That's the best thing I can say about them, and they do a great job at that. They're going to die in droves, but that's okay. That's what they're there for. Then we have a Carath Warrior, 7 inches movement, 5 health, spirit of 6, which is, it's okay. It's a little on the lower side. No range skill, melee skill is a 3-up. That's awesome. 1 fortitude, 6 armor, which is interesting, but cost 13, and there's a limit of 5 of them. These are sort of your basic beastman archetype guys. As far as their weapons, we have the Crealis Axe, which is a melee weapon, 2 attacks, D3 damage, and has armor piercing 2, so wonderful on the attack, not so much on the defense. He's kind of meager on the defensive there. And you can upgrade him with an Oak Shield, which is the wielder of the shield receives a 4+ armor save, which is wonderful. It's not going to help him with some of the more powerful attacks and spells and stuff, but I think, if you have a whole bunch of these guys and you just, want to buff up the unit, it's a free upgrade. Why not? After him is the Carath Soothsayer. Movement of 7, 5 health, 8 spirit. So spirit, that's awesome right there. Ranged attack is a 5-up. Melee skill is a 6-up. No fortitude, no armor, nothing of that. This is a truly the spellcaster stat line of like, I'm really good at magic and not anything else. His abilities, Prophetic Voice. Once per round, as a free action, the Soothsayer can target one Carath-type model within 12 inches of themselves and perform an ability based on the Sooth Totem artifact they currently have equipped. A Carath model can only be affected by one Prophetic Voice ability per round. So if you look down below, there's different upgrades. Basically, at the beginning of the game, when you're building your list, you have to choose a Soothsayer to carry one totem. So I'm going to go through those now. We're going to skip the weapons just because it makes sense to follow the different totems when we're talking about the ability that lets you use them. So the first one is the Totem of Distortion. Until the end of the game round, any armor-piercing damage this model takes is treated as normal damage. This ability does not require a line of sight. So that's great for keeping people alive. It essentially cuts down on any type of armor piercing. The second one is the Shroud Totem. Until the end of the round, treat the Carath model as being in cover, which is okay. It depends on, I think that has a lot more use when you're staring down at a gun line versus another melee army. And then the Omen Totem, which is until the end of the round, the Carath's weapon inflict sap to an enemy model when they hit them with a melee weapon. Sap is a special rule, which we can go over here. If a model is inflicted with sapped, place a sap token next to them until the end of the round. The model receives -2 to their spirit and -2 to their movement. Then remove the tokens. And you can't stack those things on an enemy more than once. So essentially it gives them the ability to hurt their spirit stat, which does matter to some lists, but more importantly, in my opinion, it shuts down a little bit of their movement, which in a game of board control is very meaningful. Now, going back up to the weapons, you have the Gnarled Bolt, which costs nothing. Range of 12, has 2 attacks, does 1 damage. And this one has a unique ability called Terror. Terror essentially just means, hey, if I hit you with this weapon, you need to take a spirit test. Roll 2d6 and you're trying to get under your spirit value. If you fail, you take D3 divine damage, which is a huge bummer. Keep in mind, it's a ranged attack. He's only hitting on 5-ups. It has the close ranged special rule, so he can also use it in melee, but he's not going to be hitting a whole lot. He also has access to the Staff of Stupefaction, which is a wonderful name for a weapon. Only costs 2 points. Same thing, ranged is 12 inches, attacks 2, damage 1, but it just adds a bunch of special rules to his attack. So the biggest one being Terror, Sap, Disoriented, and Close Ranged. So Terror, same thing, he's going to make you take a spirit check. If you fail, you take damage. Sap will reduce your movement by 2 and your spirit by 2. Disoriented means you're basically 1 point worse at doing everything. Like your to hit goes up by 1, your to wound goes up by 1, that kind of stuff. And then close ranged, meaning he can do it in melee as well. Personally, this is one of those things, if you have an extra 2 points in the list, why not give him the ability? You really, really, really don't want these guys in combat. They are meant to be backfield supporters. And I think the real crux here is just finding out what kind of support your frontline needs. It could be either 3 of the totems. It could just be having the Soothsayer stay back on an objective. There's a lot of things it can do, and they have access to some really cool spells. And the last unit in this set, and my personal favorite, is the Crealis Wolf. So it has a 7-inch move, only 4 health. It's got a spirit of 5, no ranged skill, melee skill of 4 up, no fortitude, armor 5 up, and only costs 9 points, and you can have up to 5 of them. Now, they do have the feral word, so that means basically they're always going to be trying to rush towards the nearest enemy model. You have no control over that. You can attack with them, of course, obviously after that, but that's really what they want to be doing. But they also have this rule called Leap. This model can initiate melee combat if it's within 2 inches away of an enemy model. If melee combat is initiated this way, place the model to the closest point that is within 1 inch of the enemy model. This ability cannot be used if the model is in melee combat. So essentially, it just gives them a wider range to be able to get into melee, which just kind of projects their threat a little bit more. Between that and the 7-inch move, which is higher than average, I think he can really like long bomb charge some stuff and make some death happen. And for his attacks, he has Rip and Tear. Costs nothing. It's a melee attack. For the number of attacks that he rolls, it is 2 plus a d3. So on average, about 4 attacks. They only do 1 damage each, but this special rule we haven't seen before in this faction, that is a rapid volley. When you roll to hit, if you roll a 6, it does an additional attack. Like your opponent has to make an additional save for it. We see this in a few other miniature games as well. It's a nice little buff, and it's not going to come up every single die roll unless you roll like straight 6s. But it's a nice little buff to offset some of the misses that he will get. So it's a cool ability for sure on a little missile guy like this little wolf. And those are all the units that you get inside the core box. Now there's multiples of each of them, barring the named characters, which is awesome. And with these, you can build a few different archetypes that I wanted to talk about now. My favorite, and the one that I have the most experience with, is I call it Sapling Spam. Essentially, you have a number of spells that you can add into your power deck, and of course abilities on cards that will reward you for taking saplings. So you're going to start your list with maybe 1 or 2, but then between spirits from the Aldasas and the Ashala, the named character, you can easily summon 3 per round. And those little guys, just to let you know, when you summon a unit to the game, it comes in as being already activated, so you can't actually do anything with it until the next round. But what you're setting yourself up for is a lot of board control and threat projection. There's also this really cool spell where like any time an Aldasa dies, they can like burst into 2 more saplings. You're getting victory points for all of those based on the types of gambits that you bring in. There's a lot of cool stuff when it comes to that kind of archetype of a list. We mentioned before that you can go big beasties, have 2 Athel Guardians loaded to the gills, and then whatever types of support you want to have behind them, whether that is Ashala giving one of them a 5-up divine save, whether it's a Carath Warrior won't work because he has to use the totem on a Carath unit, but there are spell cards and things like that, especially with the Light and Dark Fate cards as well, that can supercharge 2 units, and so the idea behind that archetype, 2 big Athel Guardians, maybe Olfan Blood Creek as well. You're trying to support all 3 of those as they go in and just murderate stuff, and then you can have lesser models, spellcasters, all that kind of stuff, just sit on objectives to get you some points that way. What's cool about that is if you have these big melee monsters, they're killing things and they will kill stuff. I cannot tell you enough how dangerous an Athel Guardian buff to the 9s is. He's going to kill stuff, and if you notice, when you kill things for the first time in a round, you get a Gaia point. Well, you can spend a Gaia point to give one of them a 5-up divine save. And so it's this circular loop of constantly feeding the beast of keeping these guys going. One thing that I've started experimenting with that I haven't finalized a list for, but is really focusing on Crealis Wolves and another unit called the Sybarite. So the Crealis Wolf, is the wolf with a bunch of crystals in its back. Sybarite is similar, but with like a panther with crystals all over it, and they both have incredible speed, a lot of mobility, and when I say mobility, I don't just mean speed. I separate them because they have a good speed stat, but when I say mobility, I'm talking about extra rules that make them more dangerous, like leap. The Sybarite in particular has special ability cards that will allow him to leap great distances. He can fade into the shadows and pop up somewhere else on the battlefield edge. He can do all kinds of things. So it's a speed and aggression kind of focused army. And the last one, and the one that has kicked my teeth in consistently, is the Spirit Bomb army. Essentially, when this game launches, it's not in the core set, But if you get the highest tier of Kickstarter, you get access to like the first wave of Legacy of Atmos models that's coming out separately from this. One of those units, I call it Bambi's dad, essentially can force units to take terror tests, which is you roll 2 dice. If they're lower than your spirit value, you're fine. If it's above it, you take D3 mortal wounds. But if you can keep doing that over and over again, we saw saplings have a spirit of 4, like they're dead, super dead. So that kind of thing. So there are different list archetypes. I just wanted to point that out, even though it doesn't come specifically in this box. That is a popular thing within the Tellus Commune sort of meta or group. Now, normally I end these videos by asking the question, is this a good starter set for the faction? Of course, in this, it's a little bit different because this is the only starter set for the faction. What I would be able to tell you from this, though, is that you do have all the models you need to build at least 3 of the archetypes I talked about. You can do saplings, the big beasties, because you do get 2 Athel Guardians. I recommend that as a first kind of design space to go towards, because you're going to get a lot of sense of how units interact with one another with keywords. And then you can also do a whole bunch of little feral creatures, just have a ton of little guys that just flood forward. You can do that as well. So thank you for joining me as we went through all of the contents of the Tellus Crusade box. Like I said, there's a lot of versatility in these models and a lot of lists that I just frankly haven't had time to be able to try. But I do think they're a great amount of fun. I like the aggressive nature of just rushing up the board, capturing objectives. The Tellus Commune is definitely my preferred playstyle, but I will be honest with you, the Federation of Atmos has some baller models that are calling my name. So we're going to talk about those in tomorrow's video. Thank you all so much for watching, and happy wargaming.